I would like to tell you about my new essay, Why Europe Failed. Now, it doesn't sound like a too optimistic a title, right? But by now we would have all heard about the European debt crisis. We would have heard a lot over the past 5 years about Greece and Greece's debt crisis. But actually, this essay explains why this crisis is far deeper than just Athens and Greece, and why we're really talking about a crisis of a whole continent. So as I said, it's a history lesson. I'm going back into the 1950s to explain the reasons, the roots of this European crisis by explaining why Europe really came together in the 1950s. And there were two reasons that you wouldn't read about in the official history books of Europe. The first reason is actually that the European Union is a byproduct of the Cold War. It was an attempt to unite Western European nations against the threat of the Soviet Union and its allies. And the second reason was it was a close embrace of Germany by its Western European neighbors because they wanted to stop Germany from once again becoming a threat. So they were embracing it in such a close way that Germany couldn't move any longer. So these were the geopolitical reasons why Western European integration took off in the 1950s. And as you can see, it had nothing to do with a grand economic plan. It was not an economic project, it was a political project. Interestingly, European peoples were never too enthusiastic about this, and they were rarely asked whether they really wanted to go along with European integration. So European integration, I argue, has never been that popular in the first place. The question then is, why did it go ahead regardless? And the answer to that is actually my second thesis of the essay, and it is really a way of bribing European voters with their own money by providing them with an ever-growing welfare state. And I think here we can see the reasons why Europe has failed and why the European project is failing, because European governments have simply become too big. They're spending way too much money. They're spending more money than they have, and that means they have to borrow and have to go deep into debt. And I think this is also the reason why European states, why European welfare states are simply way bigger than their counterparts, say in Australia, New Zealand, or America. Europe is bribing their people with their own money to the point that European governments, look at France, are now spending more than 50% of the total economy. And you cannot run an economy successfully with a government setup like this. And this is why Europe failed argues quite clearly, because I think we in this part of the world have to learn the lessons of Europe's decline. We have to be very careful about top-down political projects that are basically pushed upon the people by political and bureaucratic elites, as happened in the European Union case. But we have to also be very careful about governments that are simply becoming too big, where government is taxing too much, where government is spending too much, and where government is borrowing too much, because that's where Europe also went wrong. So why Europe failed is, in a way, a history lesson. It explains why Europe got into its current troubles, but it is also a lesson that we have to learn here, because there are lots of European mistakes that we would like to avoid here. And fortunately, on some measures, for example, demographic change, we are 30 or 40 years behind the European curve, which means we've got a lot of time to avoid the worst mistakes that Europe has made. But if we want to avoid the European mistakes, we have to at least know about them, and this is why I hope you will read Why Europe Failed, and you will enjoy it nevertheless. Thank you.